That Christmas Eve in Boston was so cold that every breath turned into a white mist in the air. I, Lauren Mitchell, 34 years old, stood with my daughter Emily on the porch of my parents' red brick house, gazing through the glowing windows. Inside, Christmas music blended with laughter and the clinking of glasses, creating a symphony of joy. But for me, those sounds were only a reminder that my daughter and I did not belong there. The phone in my hand buzzed. My mother's voice came through, smooth but distant. "Honey, there's not enough space this year. Your sister Rachel has her 3 kids, so I hope you understand." I turned to Emily, clutching tightly the 2 red-wrapped gifts she had carefully folded with her small hands. Her eyes sparkled as if waiting for a miracle, but before that locked door, miracles never came. I knelt down, stroked her hair, and whispered, "One day, you'll have a place of your own. And when that day comes, the words your grandparents said tonight will be returned." I held her hand, and together we walked away, leaving behind the echo of laughter that never stopped. If you have ever been excluded from the Christmas table, would you choose to stay silent and endure, or build a new table for yourself? And where are you watching this story from? Share your story in the comments so I know I am not alone. After that first Christmas standing outside on the porch, I realized there are wounds that never heal, only layered deeper by the repetition of the same pain. Each winter, Boston dressed itself in a white coat of snow, Christmas lights glowing along Beacon Hill, while in my heart there remained a cut that refused to close. People often say time heals all wounds, but for me, time only turned rejection into routine. The second Christmas after that, Emily and I were invited. But when we stepped inside, every seat around the oak dining table was already taken. My mother, in her sparkling deep red dress, pointed toward a folding chair set up in the corner of the kitchen and said as if it were a normal arrangement, "You can sit here, dear, so Rachel's family can have the main table. The kids need to be comfortable." I forced a smile, but Emily looked around, hesitant, as she saw her cousins of the same age sitting neatly at the long table, with plates of golden roast turkey and creamy mashed potatoes before them. While in front of her there was only a small, lonely table pushed up against the microwave. On the third Christmas, we were pushed down to the basement. The damp smell mixed with the aroma of the feast upstairs, seeping through the cracks in the door, making the air even heavier. Emily was only 6 then, holding the old doll I had saved up to buy for her. In a trembling voice, she asked, "Mom, why can't we sit with everyone else?" My throat tightened. I forced a smile and lied, "It's more fun here, we have our own space." But when I saw the shimmer in her eyes, I knew she didn't believe me. And inside me, waves of shame rose higher and higher, as if I had been stripped bare before my own blood. By the 4th year, we were almost forgotten from the guest list. It wasn't until the afternoon of the 24th that my mother called. Her voice carried a hint of guilt but quickly hardened into distance. "I forgot. You can stop by if you want, but don't bring much, just pick up some napkins." I stayed quiet, nodded, and took Emily along. She wore a red dress I had sewn from an old one, stepping into the house with hope of being welcomed. But every gaze turned toward Rachel and her 3 children, dressed in brand new velvet green outfits. Emily sat hugging her knees in the corner of the living room, while I stood behind the kitchen counter, quietly opening the cheap pack of napkins. Laughter rang out as Rachel bragged about their vacation in Florida, and her husband, a well-known lawyer, recounted his big courtroom victory. My mother nodded along, her eyes shining with pride. And me? I was nearly invisible, as if I didn't exist at all. The following years were no better. Sometimes we were placed in the hallway at a tiny table, sometimes we were ignored when gifts were handed out. Rachel was always the center of it all, with my mother preparing every detail for her. Pumpkin pie baked exactly to her taste, velvet-covered chairs, even a choir singing as her family entered. And me? I would be told, "Pick up some cookies from the supermarket, the packaged kind is fine." It sounded like an errand, nothing more. I still remember one time, when Emily was about 8 years old, sitting in the car on the way home after the party, clutching a small teddy bear a kind relative had given her. She turned to me, eyes full of tears, and asked, "Mom, why can't we sit at the main table with the family?" I saw there were always empty seats. My throat closed up, my heart squeezed tight. I knew she had noticed it for a long time, only trying to hide her sadness so as not to hurt me. I drove through the falling snow, Christmas lights along the street fading behind the veil of my own tears. That night, after she fell asleep, I sat silently for hours in the living room, wondering how blood ties could draw such harsh lines. 10 years passed, the same wound etched deeper. Each Christmas, Emily and I were placed in those not enough space spots: the basement, a folding chair, the hallway, or, worst of all, left off the list entirely. Rachel, my younger sister, 2 years below me, was always the star in our parents' eyes. Her husband was successful, her 3 children went to private school, her family was the picture of perfection. And me? In their eyes, I was just a single mother trying to scrape by with freelance work they didn't consider serious. It became a familiar rhythm every time I walked into that house. "So you're freelancing? When will you get a real job? A company paycheck, insurance, a proper business card?" My father would ask in a half-joking, half-serious tone, but his eyes were cold, as if I were living a failed life. My mother would just shake her head, sip her wine, and add with a hint of scorn, "Why don't you try being an assistant at Rachel's husband's law office? At least then you'd have a proper place." Those words sank into me like rusty nails, each repetition spreading the corrosion, leaving behind aching scars. The truth was far from what they believed. I wasn't just a freelancer patching together odd projects. After years of teaching myself design, spending countless nights buried in Photoshop and Illustrator in my one-bedroom apartment in South Boston, I quietly built an online brand design company. In the beginning, it was anything but easy. I cared for Emily while working late into the night, sometimes falling asleep right at the keyboard. Some months I earned less than $1,000, barely enough to cover rent, utilities, and a few extra packs of instant noodles for the 2 of us. I still remember driving Emily to school in my old Toyota Corolla, the heater barely working. She sat in the back seat, blowing warm air into her little hands, while I thought, I have to push harder. I can't let her live like this forever. Dash. Step by step, I built my reputation. I started with small design contracts for local coffee shops, then small clothing stores, then startups searching for a brand identity. Every time I delivered a project, I gave more than what was asked: a second logo version, a fresher color palette, an extra touch of inspiration. Slowly, clients began to recommend me to others. My name started appearing among the top-rated freelancers on online job platforms. I eventually hired a part-time assistant to handle emails and scheduling. That tiny company was no longer just me. By the 9th year, the real turning point came. A network of healthcare startups in Boston approached me, needing a full branding system for their entire chain. After multiple rounds of presentations, they signed a 6-figure contract. I still remember sitting in my favorite cafe, staring at the electronic signature appearing on the PDF contract on my laptop screen. I couldn't believe my eyes. I read it 3 times before bursting into tears right there in the cafe, ignoring the curious stares around me. For me, it wasn't just a big contract, it was validation, proof that all those years of being dismissed, of being asked, "When will you get a real job?" had finally been answered by reality itself. From that day on, I began to save with a plan. I kept living simply, driving the old Toyota, dressing neatly but never flaunting anything. I let my parents and Rachel believe I was just getting by, that I was struggling with some fake job on the internet. I no longer needed to prove anything to them, because the truth that mattered was proving it to myself. But deep inside, one thought grew stronger with every passing day. I would build a real table, a place where no one could ever tell me there wasn't enough room. Every dollar I earned, I divided carefully. Part went to Emily, part was reinvested into the company, and part I set aside for the big plan. I started studying real estate, reading about hotel management, even attending small tourism workshops, all to prepare for the day I could create a space of my own. I wanted a place where my daughter, and anyone who had ever been excluded from a table, could sit down without asking permission, without giving up their seat, without enduring pity. Each night, after Emily was asleep, I opened my laptop and searched for vacant inns, resorts in need of renovation along the Massachusetts coast. I saved every detail, every photo, as if curating a secret archive just for myself. That was the quiet fire inside me, the flame that kept both of us warm through the freezing winter nights, when memories of the basement or the folding chair returned. And I knew that soon, that dream would take shape. During those months of working tirelessly and saving every penny for the big plan, I stumbled upon a listing on a local real estate site, a small beachfront resort in Cape Cod, Massachusetts. It had once been a popular family getaway in the 1,980 seconds, but years of neglect had left it in ruins. Only 16 rooms, roof tiles corroded by the ocean air, a cracked swimming pool, and a restaurant nearly abandoned. The asking price was so low that most people saw it as a money pit. But to me, it was an opportunity. I remember staring at the photos of the long stretch of white sand, the fiery sunset melting into the ocean behind it, and my heart beat faster. I knew this was the place where I could build my own table. I entered negotiations with my heart full of determination. Of course, I didn't have enough cash to buy it outright, but years of building my company had taught me how to turn numbers into strength. I worked with the bank, preparing an application under the SBA loan program for small businesses. I proved that I had a six-figure contract with the healthcare startup network, that my design company was growing steadily, and that I had a detailed business plan for restoring the resort. The weeks of waiting for approval felt like decades. I was scared, hopeful, and constantly questioning if I was crazy for diving into an industry where I had no experience. But one March afternoon, when the email arrived, "Your loan has been approved," I broke down crying right there in my tiny office, holding Emily tight in my arms. She giggled, not fully understanding, only knowing that her mother was overflowing with joy. The purchase went through faster than I expected. I signed the papers at a notary office in Hyannis, held the worn old keys in my hand, and drove to Cape Cod for the first time as the owner. Standing on the beach in front of the resort, the sea breeze whipping through my hair, I closed my eyes and imagined a place no longer abandoned but reborn as a symbol of renewal. I could see it already, Harbor Light Resort, the name I had carried in my mind for years, a beacon guiding those who had once been left behind. The renovation lasted 9 months, filled with sweat, tears, and moments when I thought I might collapse from exhaustion. I hired a team of young, passionate architects and worked with them closely on every detail. We tore down old walls, replaced the plumbing and electrical systems, relaid the wooden floors, and, most importantly, built an infinity pool facing the ocean, a centerpiece I wanted every guest to remember. I wasn't just thinking of creating a vacation spot, I wanted this place to be a blend of luxury and warmth, a home for those who had once been told there wasn't enough room. The restaurant became my pride and joy. I named it Coastal Christmas, a space that carried the spirit of Christmas year-round, a season that had once been my pain, now transformed into my strength. A towering Christmas tree stood in the center of the lobby, its decorations changing with the seasons but its lights always glowing. The menu offered traditional New England dishes with a touch of international flavor, and, of course, there was always hot chocolate, Emily's favorite. The greatest symbol of the resort stood right in the lobby, a long oak table that could seat up to 20 people. Etched into its surface were the words, "For everyone who was ever told there's no room." Every time I looked at that inscription, I saw the image of Emily and me standing outside in the freezing cold, holding our gifts but never allowed inside. Now, I had turned that pain into an invitation for anyone who had ever felt excluded. Each day of those 9 months of renovation brought me closer to the dream. I woke at 5 in the morning, drove from Boston down to Cape Cod, worked until late at night, and only then returned to our apartment. There were days when exhaustion nearly broke me, when I questioned whether I could carry the weight of it all. But then I would see Emily running across the sand, drawing hearts in the wet shore and shouting, "This is our home." And suddenly, my strength returned. The resort wasn't just a business project, it was the declaration of my life, that my daughter and I would never again be pushed to a folding chair in the kitchen or a cold basement. On the day the work was finally complete, I stood before the front gates, the new sign glowing proudly, Harbor Light Resort. I placed my hand on the letters and whispered, "We did it." In that moment, I knew I had rewritten fate not just for myself, but for everyone who had ever been turned away, for everyone who had ever been told there wasn't enough room. The following July, as the summer sun stretched across the Cape Cod shoreline, I decided to bring Emily to Harbor Light Resort, a place that, for nearly a year, had been nothing but construction dust, rushed lunches among piles of plaster, and weary late-night drives back to Boston. But today was different. The work was complete, everything was ready for our first stay that carried no trace of tears, only freedom and laughter. I remember the exact moment the car stopped in front of the resort gates, the Harbor Light Resort sign gleaming under the golden sundae. Emily leapt from her seat, running straight into the lobby like a little bird finally freed from its cage. She squealed with delight at the sight of the Christmas tree still glowing brightly in the middle of summer, sparkling as if the season had never ended. I opened the door to the beachfront suite for her. It was the room I had poured my heart into designing. Crisp white walls, a balcony opening directly to the ocean, a large bed draped in sea blue linens, and a cozy corner just for children, with shelves of books and toys. Emily froze for a moment, then shouted, "Mom, our room looks just like in the movies." She raced out to the balcony, arms spread wide to catch the sea breeze, her hair flying, her laughter mingling with the sound of the waves. I stood watching, my heart warming as if bathed in sunlight. All the sleepless nights, all the times I was dismissed, all the evenings spent in silence on a folding chair seemed to dissolve in that single moment. In the afternoon, I took Emily down to the private stretch of sand I had hired people to clean, lined with new lounge chairs and big white umbrellas. She kicked off her shoes and ran barefoot across the sand, leaving tiny footprints trailing behind her. I watched as she bent down to draw a giant heart and wrote the word home inside it. When she turned back to me, her eyes sparkled. "Mom, this really is our home now, isn't it?" I choked up and nodded. There was no need to explain further, because we both understood that home wasn't about a roof over our heads but about having a seat, a rightful place in the world. That evening, I took her to the coastal Christmas restaurant. Even in summer, the space was filled with the spirit of Christmas, warm golden lights, wreaths hanging on the walls, and a towering tree in the center of the hall. When the server brought out the hot chocolate cake, Emily's favorite, she practically jumped up with joy. She broke off a piece, the sweet scent of chocolate rising into the air, and grinned. "Mom, it tastes just like yours, but with extra cream." I smiled, nodded, and whispered, "See? We have our seat now." The words echoed inside me as an affirmation not just for my daughter, but for myself, a recognition that the long, humiliating journey had led to this moment. As night fell, Emily and I sat together on the suite's balcony, listening to the waves crashing on the shore. She leaned her head on my shoulder and whispered, "Mom, I want us to spend Christmas here this year. We don't need Grandma and Grandpa, we don't need their big table. Just you and me." I held her tight, looking out into the dark expanse of the sea where only the distant lights of fishing boats glimmered. In that moment, I knew. At last, we were no longer the people left standing outside a door, clutching gifts with no seat at the table. We had a place of our own, and, from here on, everything would never be the same. The grand opening of Harbor Light Resort arrived sooner than I expected. After months of preparation, I had poured myself into every detail to make this place not just a vacation spot, but a symbol of a new beginning. I didn't want that first day to be overshadowed by the faces of those who had belittled or rejected us. That's why the guest list only included the people who had reached out their hands when I was drowning in the dark. The aunts and uncles who were rarely acknowledged at family dinners but always slipped Emily a small box of cookies, the neighbors who watched her for me when I had to work late, the friends who never once asked, "When will you get a real job?" And even Emily's teachers, who saw the bright light in her that her own grandparents refused to see. I sent invitations printed on thick cardstock, each one accompanied by a photo of the 20-seat oak table engraved with the words, "For everyone who was ever told there's no room." On every card I wrote a few personal lines by hand, letting them know that their presence in my life was the very reason I wanted them there on this important day. And when the replies started coming in, my heart felt warmed. Everyone was excited, everyone was looking forward to it. In total, 28 people confirmed, just enough to fill the 16 rooms of the resort. I had decided to cover all the costs from lodging and meals to the activities. This wasn't business. This was gratitude. That day, Cape Cod shimmered under golden sunlight, the waves glittering like strands of tinsel beneath the sky. I stood at the entrance in a simple sea blue dress, with Emily by my side in a white dress tied with a pale blue ribbon. As the first guests arrived, the resort seemed to come alive. My aunt, the one who had once secretly pressed $10 into my hand so I could buy Emily a gift during a cold Christmas, hugged me tightly, her eyes brimming. "Lauren, you did it." Friends from Boston marveled at the infinity pool stretching toward the ocean, while Emily's teachers couldn't stop praising the glowing lights of the coastal Christmas restaurant. The opening celebration unfolded in the grand hall, where the long oak table with 20 seats stood in honor. As everyone took their places, laughter and conversation filled the air, but this time, unlike all the holidays before, Emily and I sat at the very center. No one was crammed into a basement, no one balanced on a folding chair, and no one was told to give up their place for some star. I watched my daughter beam with joy as she sat beside her best friend, as her teacher placed a piece of grilled fish on her plate, and my heart swelled until it nearly burst. I rose to my feet, lifted my glass, my voice catching. Today is not only the opening of a resort, it is the day I want to thank those who once made Emily and me feel like we had a place in this world. Not everyone ever said that to us, but you did. And this Harbor Light Resort will always be open to anyone who was ever told there's no room. For a moment the hall fell silent, then applause erupted, rising and echoing through the room, blending with Emily's laughter until I nearly broke down in tears. That evening, as fireworks lit up the sky from the beach I had rented to surprise everyone, I saw Emily standing close by, her eyes glowing. She whispered, "Mom, I've never seen Christmas come in the summer, but I like it so much better this way. Here, I'm not forgotten." I held her tight, gazing up at the brilliant sky, knowing I had rewritten her memories. Memories of a table where she always had a seat, a table where love triumphed over neglect. What struck me most was that, throughout the entire day, not a single person mentioned my parents or Rachel. They weren't there, and I hadn't invited them. There were no sharp remarks, no bitter comparisons, no moments where we were pushed to the margins. And that absence made the celebration feel complete. I realized that sometimes, to truly find joy, you have to be brave enough to remove the faces that caused your pain. And in that moment, I felt no regret. When the guests departed, leaving the resort still echoing with laughter, Emily and I walked along the shoreline, our footprints pressed into the wet sand. She held my hand tightly and looked up. "Mom, can we invite them again next time? I love seeing everyone so happy." I nodded, tears blurring my vision with joy. That night, I knew Harbor Light was no longer just my dream. It was a place that could bring laughter to everyone who had ever been turned away. And that was the greatest victory of my life. 2 weeks after the grand opening, while the echoes of laughter and the congratulations from friends still lingered in my mind, I received a phone call from my mother. The number flashing on the screen made my chest tighten, as though an invisible thread was pulling me back to every cold Christmas of the past. I hesitated for a few seconds, but in the end, I picked up. My mother's voice came through, equal parts eager and doubtful. "Lauren, I just heard from your cousin Benjamin. You have a resort? I can't believe it. You buying a resort?" I let out a dry laugh, leaning back in my chair as my eyes drifted toward the window, where the waves rose and fell. "Believe it or not, that's up to you." On the other end, I heard her falter, followed by a sigh tinged with irritation. "You didn't say a word to anyone. I'm your mother. How could you let outsiders tell me first?" I bit my lip as that familiar sting of unreasonable blame washed over me. Before I could answer, Rachel's voice cut in, sharp as a knife to the chest. You really are selfish, opening a resort and not even inviting family. Are you trying to tear us all apart? I closed my eyes, drew a long breath, and replied steadily. Rachel, it was family that tore me apart first for 10 years. Weren't you and Mom and Dad the ones who left Emily and me in the basement, on folding chairs, or sometimes didn't bother inviting us at all? A heavy silence followed. I heard my mother inhale as if to interrupt, but I pressed on, my voice firmer now. Do you remember the email I sent in the 6th year? I offered to chip in money to rent extra tables or even book a nearby hotel room just so Emily could sit with everyone. I wrote it clearly, but you never replied. And that year, we were sent back to the basement again. On the line came the sound of her harsh breathing, then her voice, low and halting. I was busy. The email must have gotten lost. Rachel let out a mocking laugh. You're always playing the victim. Mom and Dad did their best for everyone, but all you ever do is complain. This resort is just your way of showing off. I pressed my lips together, then answered calmly. If I wanted to show off, I would have done it the day I signed a 6-figure contract, or the day I bought this resort, but I didn't. I built Harbor Light not to prove anything to you or anyone else, but so Emily and the people who deserve it will always have a place at the table. Something that never existed in our house. I heard my mother sigh, her voice shrinking. Honey, I never thought things would turn out this way. I just wanted everyone to be happy. I cut in. You say you wanted everyone to be happy, but in that everyone, you never included me and Emily. For 10 years, you made your choice. Now don't blame me for finally making mine. The call ended in silence. I set the phone down on the table, a strange mix of heaviness and relief washing over me. Emily walked in, holding a piece of chocolate cake from the restaurant, her curious eyes wide. Who was that, Mom? I smoothed her hair and smiled. Someone just found out about our Harbor Light. She giggled. Then they need to know this place is really ours. That night, I sat alone in the resort's lobby, the lights casting a glow across the 20-seat oak table. I ran my fingers across the carved words, feeling the strength in every line. For everyone who is ever told there's no room. And I knew I had crossed another turning point, not the daughter left shivering outside the door anymore, but the woman strong enough to speak the truth, to hold her boundaries, and to protect her daughter to the very end. After that tense call with my mother and Rachel, I thought there would be a long silence between us. But just a few months later, as autumn painted the Boston streets in gold with falling maple leaves, my phone rang again. This time, my mother's voice sounded different, sweeter, as if she were trying to pour honey over the cracks of the past. Lauren, come home for Thanksgiving this year. The whole family will be together, and I want you and Emily at the table. I listened, but inside, I almost laughed. After 10 years of being cast aside, suddenly she wanted a family gathering. I knew the reason well. They had heard the resort's revenue was thriving, and perhaps, in her eyes, I had become valuable again. I didn't answer right away. Instead, I asked slowly, the dining table at home is still the same 7-seat oak one, isn't it, Mom? She hesitated. Yes, still the same. I began to count, each word deliberate, sharp as a blade. Rachel's husband, their 3 kids, that's 5. You and Dad, that's 7. So where will Emily and I sit? There was silence on the other end for a few seconds before my mother stammered. Well, there's always the folding chairs in the kitchen. You can sit there, as long as we're together. At that, I couldn't hold back anymore. My voice was cold as the first winter wind. Mom, after 10 years, you still don't understand, do you? I will not bring my daughter just to sit on folding chairs in the kitchen ever again. I hung up, leaving her faint voice calling my name to fade into the emptiness. Instead of returning to that old house with its leftover chairs shuffled around for whoever was deemed less important, I decided to host a true Thanksgiving at Harbor Light Resort. I sent invitations to everyone who had once been left on the sidelines at family gatherings. Aunt Susan always looked down on because of her divorce. Uncle Martin constantly compared to Thomas, the kind neighbors who had watched Emily when I was stuck in meetings, and the friends and colleagues who had stood by me through every hard mile. I wanted this year's table to be different. No more dividing seats, no more judging eyes, only laughter and respect. When the holiday arrived, the resort glowed in the golden colors of autumn leaves. I prepared a feast fit for the occasion. Crisp roasted turkey, creamy mashed potatoes, deep red cranberry sauce, and fragrant pumpkin pie fresh from the oven. Coastal Christmas sparkled with lights, and the 20-seat oak table was adorned with fresh flowers and glowing candles. As guests arrived, I could see the wonder in their eyes. Many of them had never once been seated at the main table in their lives. Emily darted about, happily guiding each person to their place, like a proud little hostess. When everyone was seated, I looked around. 28 faces shining, laughter flowing through the air like music. I saw Aunt Susan raise a glass without anyone interrupting her, Uncle Martin telling stories freely without mockery. And there, at the very center of the table, under the soft glow of candlelight, Emily sat beside me, her eyes brimming with happiness. She grinned wide as she picked up the first piece of turkey, her bright gaze reflecting the lights above. I whispered to her, "Do you see? This is where we truly belong. For the first time, you're at the main table, surrounded by light and laughter." Emily nodded, her lips smudged with cranberry sauce, but her smile outshone every light in the room. After the feast, everyone gathered for photos beside the Christmas tree. The pictures flooded social media, the group laughing around the long table, confetti bursting in the air, voices singing Happy Thanksgiving echoing through the hall. But in every single photo, there was no sign of my parents or Rachel. And their absence quickly became the subject of whispers. Old friends, neighbors, even distant acquaintances of my family began to ask, why weren't Patricia and Thomas there? Why weren't they invited when their entire extended family was? The rumors spread quickly, like ocean winds scattering golden leaves across the streets of Cape Cod. My family had once been praised as the perfect image, a successful couple, 2 daughters, a picture of completeness. But after this Thanksgiving, that polished surface began to crack. As the joyful photos spread online, people saw the truth more clearly, that this model family had excluded their eldest daughter and granddaughter for 10 long years. All the favoritism they had tried to hide was now laid bare under the lights of Harbor Light Resort. That evening, after saying goodbye to the guests, Emily and I walked the beach again. The waves lapped against the shore like a gentle lullaby. She held my hand and asked innocently, "Mom, can we do it here again next year? I want everyone to sit together at the same table like today." I squeezed her hand, my eyes blurring with happiness. I knew then that this Thanksgiving wasn't just a dinner, it was a milestone. For the first time in her life, Emily sat at the main table, and I no longer had to bow my head to a folding chair. I looked up at the star-filled night sky and told myself, I had done what, 10 years ago, I only dared whisper on the porch. I had built my own table, and this time it was wide enough, bright enough, that no one would ever again hear the words, "There's no room." The next time I saw my family after that Thanksgiving was at my cousin's wedding, held in a grand hotel in New York where crystal lights glittered from chandeliers and classical music filled the ballroom. From the moment I received the invitation, I suspected it would be the occasion where we'd all be forced to face each other after everything that had happened. But I never imagined this seating arrangement would become living proof of just how much had changed. When I entered the hall, an usher guided me directly to the main table where the bride, groom, and the most honored guests Saturday. Right beside them, seats for Emily and me were already prepared, draped in crisp white linens, with fresh flowers arranged in crystal vases. I glanced around, and within minutes I spotted my parents and Rachel with her family awkwardly searching for their seats. They hadn't been placed at the main table at all, but off to the side, near the entrance where waitstaff came and went constantly. Rachel's eyes flashed with anger when she saw me seated at the center, smiling calmly. I could almost hear her screaming inside. Why me, the one they had dismissed for 10 years, was now being honored, while they were pushed to the margins. The party drifted on under soft music and a chorus of blessings. I chatted with the bride and groom, raised my glass with relatives, and watched Emily running about with the other children, her eyes shining with happiness. But, across the hall, I kept catching Rachel's furious stare. The red wine had flushed her cheeks, but the bitterness was etched into every strained smile. Midway through the evening, Rachel suddenly stood up and staggered toward me. Under the curious eyes of a few guests, she grabbed my arm and pulled me out of the ballroom into a quiet corridor. The smell of alcohol clung to her, her voice unsteady. "Who do you think you are? Sitting at the main table while Mom, Dad, and I are treated like outsiders. You're taking revenge on us, aren't you?" I looked straight into her eyes, my voice steady. "Rachel, for 10 years I've heard enough snide remarks. I've sat in basements, on folding chairs, or been left off the guest list entirely. That's over now. I don't have to endure it anymore." Rachel gave a crooked, mocking laugh, but it faltered at the edges. "You're delusional. This family has always been mine. Mom and Dad always chose me. So what if you have a resort?" She swayed another step closer, her tone dropping, oddly fragile. "The truth is, I'm jealous. Jealous because you're free. I'm trapped in the loop being someone's wife, raising 3 kids, living up to expectations. I thought that was happiness, but so many nights I want to run away. And you got out." For the first time in my life, I heard Rachel admit something real. The arrogance was gone, the mocking laughter stripped away. All that remained was a tired woman, weighed down by the very burdens she had once proudly flaunted. I sighed, not feeling triumphant as she might have imagined, but only a deep, quiet sorrow. Softly, I said, "You can start over at any time, Rachel. But not by stepping on me, or by turning Emily and me into outsiders." Just then, the hotel security approached. Perhaps the bride and groom had noticed the tension and didn't want their celebration disrupted. I gave them a small nod, signaling it was fine, then turned back to Rachel. "You should return to the hall. This is our cousin's happy day, don't make it harder for everyone." Rachel stood still for a moment, her eyes red, before turning away and staggering back to her seat. I returned to the main table and took Emily's hand. She looked at me, hesitating before asking, "Mom, what's wrong with Aunt Rachel?" I smiled, shook my head, and said, "She just drank too much, don't worry." But inside, I knew I had just heard a piece of truth Rachel had hidden for years. She was jealous, she was exhausted, but choosing to pour all that bitterness onto me had made the distance between us impossible to bridge. After the wedding in New York, back in Boston, I felt as though I had entered a new phase. Harbor Light Resort was running steadily, guests increasing each month, praise on social media flowing without pause. But I didn't stop there. One January afternoon, while flipping through the newspaper, I came across a listing for a small resort in Vermont, a place famous for its snow-covered slopes and long ski seasons. My heart quickened, just as it had the first time I saw Harbor Light. I knew then this was the next step. I drove to Vermont on a freezing morning, my breath turning into clouds of white in the air. The lodge sat nestled deep among towering pines, their branches draped in thick layers of snow like cotton. Though the facilities were worn and dated, I saw its potential: warm wooden cabins, majestic natural scenery, and the kind of crisp, pure air anyone would dream of breathing. I named it Mountain Pine Lodge, with the vision of transforming it into a winter retreat and ski haven for families longing to rediscover true warmth and connection. Unlike the first time, I was no longer alone. I partnered with an experienced hotel manager who had overseen resorts all across New England. He guided me through business strategy, hiring staff, and handling finances. Meanwhile, I took charge of branding, design, and creating a guest experience that would feel unforgettable. Together we worked seamlessly, and within just a year, Mountain Pine Lodge officially opened its doors. On opening day, Emily held my hand, her eyes sparkling as she saw the cabins glowing with golden light amid the pine forest. She squealed when she spotted the brand-new ski slope and the outdoor fire pit where guests could roast s'mores. I whispered, "See, sweetheart, we don't just have the sea now, we have the mountains too." She burst into laughter, as if the world itself had finally opened wide for the two of us. Success followed success. But it was at that very moment my parents reappeared. One December afternoon, as snow began to fall thick over Boston's streets, my mother called. Her voice sounded cheerful, but underneath it I heard the same calculation I had known all my life. "Lauren, how about letting the whole family spend Christmas at your resort this year? I think it would be wonderful for everyone to gather together at Harbor Light." I stayed silent for a few seconds before answering firmly. "The resort is fully booked, Mom. And I will not cancel paying guests just to fix mistakes you still refuse to admit." On the other end, silence hung heavy. Then her tone sharpened, just like it had so many times when I was a child. "What more do you want? An apology? Fine. I'm sorry if you felt excluded." I gave a bitter laugh, but unlike before, I didn't tremble. Calmly, I replied, "Not if, Mom. It's the truth. For 10 years, Emily and I were excluded. You can phrase it however you like now, but nothing you say erases what happened." She went quiet again, then tried to soften her voice. "I just want the family together, Lauren. We're still family, aren't we?" I cut in, my voice steady and unyielding. "Family is not where one child gets sent to the basement while another sits at the main table. Family is not where a daughter has to wonder why she's never counted as part of everyone. A real family is where there is room for all. And you know what? I've already found that place." I hung up, my hand trembling slightly, but my heart felt strangely light. For the first time, I had set a clear boundary, refusing to let guilt pull me back into the same old cycle. I knew my mother would be upset, that they would keep calling me ungrateful, but this time, I didn't care anymore. I had 2 resorts running, a design company that was growing stronger by the day, and a daughter who was thriving happily by my side. I didn't need a half-hearted apology to confirm my worth. That Christmas Eve, Emily and I sat by the fireplace at Mountain Pine Lodge, surrounded by cheerful guests sipping hot chocolate and roasting marshmallows. Laughter filled the room, and for the first time, I felt it deep in my bones. Family could be chosen, not just inherited by blood. I looked at Emily, watching her confidently introduce herself as the daughter of the resort owner, and my heart swelled with pride. When the clock struck midnight, I stepped out onto the balcony, watching the snow sparkle under the lights. The question still echoed in my mind. Would my mother ever truly understand? But then I reminded myself, it no longer mattered. What mattered was that I had learned to hold my boundaries, to protect my daughter, and to be strong enough to walk away from a table that never had a seat for me. And yet, after that call with my mother, I realized there was still a wound inside me that had never fully healed. I had 2 thriving resorts, a flourishing design company, and a happy daughter by my side, but deep down, I still caught myself waiting for my parents' approval. It felt like a quiet addiction. Even knowing I would only be met with disappointment, some part of me longed to hear the words, "I'm proud of you." That was when I decided to begin therapy. In the first few sessions with my therapist, it was excruciating. Having to peel back those painful memories, the cold folding chairs, the dinners where Emily and I were pushed down to the basement, my mother's half-hearted phone call made me tremble and want to run away. But slowly, session by session, I learned to name my emotions. It wasn't only anger, it was the sorrow of a child who had never once felt enough. I learned that chasing my parents' approval was like running after a mirage. And I learned that I could, in fact, live without it. As I let go of that weight, Emily began to change in her own way. I noticed she laughed more, her laughter light and unburdened, no longer haunted by the question of whether she had a seat. She proudly told her school friends, "My mom and I have our own resort." Hearing her say it with such confidence brought tears to my eyes. I knew then that I had given Emily a different kind of childhood, one where she didn't have to stand outside on Christmas Eve because there wasn't enough room. One afternoon, while we were preparing a suite at Harbor Light for new guests, Emily suddenly turned to me. "Mom, can I invite Cousin Jack here? I miss him." I froze for a moment. Jack was Rachel's oldest son, the boy who, a few times, had quietly shared his toys with Emily when both of them were seated apart from the family table. I looked into my daughter's eyes, smiled, and said, "When the grown-ups learn respect, our doors will always be open, sweetheart." Emily nodded with a satisfied smile, then ran off to keep folding bed linens, leaving me with a quiet certainty that the next generation could do better than the one before. That New Year's Eve, Emily and I stood on the balcony of Harbor Light, counting down with the guests. When the clock struck midnight, fireworks burst across the sky, their colors shimmering over the glittering ocean. Emily squealed, wrapping her arms tightly around me. I closed my eyes, letting the thunder of fireworks play like a symphony bidding farewell to the past and welcoming a new year, a new life one, where we no longer had to ask anyone for a seat at the table. 3 years after purchasing Harbor Light, I looked back and could hardly believe the journey I had walked. I now owned 2 thriving resorts, Harbor Light Resort in Cape Cod and Mountain Pine Lodge in Vermont, along with a branding company that had grown from a tiny office into a firm with 60 employees. All of it was built from sleepless nights, tears, and the unshakable belief that my daughter and I deserved a place of our own. What surprised me most was that my parents began to change, slowly but surely. They started calling Emily more often, their voices free of the mocking tone that once clung to every mention of my work. Even Rachel sometimes softened, once admitting that life inside her so-called perfect family was far harder than it looked. But whether they changed or not, I had come to understand one truth. I didn't need their approval to exist. I had learned how to give myself worth. One evening, as I sat alone in the lobby of Harbor Light, I placed my hand gently on the long oak table with 20 seats and whispered, "If someone ever tells you there's no room, build your own table. And if you must, build another. No one has the right to decide your worth." Those words weren't only a reminder for myself, but for anyone who has ever been pushed to the margins, who has ever heard the cold phrase, "no room" within their own home. If you are listening to this story, I want to tell you, never let anyone determine your value by whether or not they give you a seat. I spent 10 years on the sidelines, haunted by the words, "no room." But the moment I stopped waiting for their approval and began building my own table, my life changed. You can do the same. If a place does not honor you, walk away with courage. If someone tries to make you small, prove through your actions that you are big enough to write your own story. Remember, the light you seek does not live in someone else's eyes, but in the brave steps you take yourself. And now, I want to leave you with this question: have you ever been excluded from the Christmas table? If you have, share it with me. And tell me, where are you listening to this story from?